is why we are very happy to welcome as our keynote speaker Professor Dr. Dave Goulson, who is doing exactly this. He is a very well-known scientist, biologist, conservation expert, bestseller author, but also active for conservation. And yes, so he is linking science and responsibility, as we have just heard. He is a professor of biology at the University of Sussex in England and internationally renowned for his research on bumblebees and on insect conservation. Through his books, for example, The Lost World of Bees, and his lectures, he raises awareness of the dramatic decline in insect populations and their crucial roles in our ecosystems. He's passionately committed to biodiversity conservation and sustainable agriculture and combines science with the goal of securing natural resources for our future generations. And so also in his keynote, he will talk about the insect decline, but also about solutions. Please give a warm applause and welcome to Dave Goulson.
Thank you, Tina. Thanks for the invitation to come here and talk about insects, something I'm always happy to do. I've been fascinated by insects since I was 5 or 6 years old. I started collecting caterpillars from some weeds on the edge of the school playground and took them home, and I think I killed them, poor things, but I tried again, and eventually some of them survived and turned into these beautiful moths. And I was completely hooked. I thought it was magic, and I've been lucky to turn that childhood hobby into a career, which has been an absolute privilege. Where are we? Sorry. Get with the program. Actually, I don't think I was that weird as a child. Given half a chance, most young children get really excited. If you take them on an insect hunt, go and turn some logs over, turn stones over, run around with a net in a meadow full of flowers, they get so excited. They love it. They love to get up close and personal with insects and other creepy crawlies, invertebrates, and so on. This is my my youngest son, Seth, when he was 8 years old, with his pet cockchafer, Colin. Sadly, Colin's no longer with us, but Seth, he's now 15 and he's taller than me, but he hasn't grown out of that childhood interest in insects. But the sad reality is that most people, by the time they're teenagers or adults, they don't like insects. They're frightened of them. If anything buzzes near them, their reaction is usually to thrash around and try and kill it, because they think it's going to sting them or bite them or do something. It's a completely irrational fear, but it's quite nicely captured, I think, in this sign. The top half is in Welsh, so don't try to read that, but the bottom half, I'm guessing you can read. Warning, flying insects in the air. This was on a university campus, the University of South Wales. What kind of message does that send to the world? You know, anyone seeing that sign would think that flying insects are something to be terrified of. You know, run for your life, there's a butterfly or a bee. All it was, in fact, was some swarming ants, you know, in summer when they produce winged queens and males, completely harmless. Anyway, I don't think this kind of thing helps. Insects are, of course, in reality, amazing, beautiful, wonderful creatures. They're incredibly ancient. They've been, the first insects evolved about 480 million years ago, which makes them twice as old as the oldest dinosaurs. And because they've been around so long, they've had time to speciate into an incredible diversity of forms, weird life cycles and behaviors and colors and so on and so on. We've named more than 1 million species of insects, and they comprise well over half of all known species on the planet. What's really fascinating is scientists have tried to estimate how many insects remain to be discovered, which is quite difficult to do, fairly obviously. But most estimates suggest that there's somewhere between another 3 and 7 million more species waiting to be discovered. So we haven't yet found the majority of insects on our planet. Who knows what amazing creatures are out there waiting for us to find them. Sadly, of course, although we may not have even described most of the insects on our planet, they are, so far as we can tell, mostly in decline. And one of the most famous studies is the Krefeld Study from Germany, which used malaise traps. That tent-like thing up there is a malaise trap, which traps flying insects of all types, and most insects fly. And these German entomologists have been putting these malaise traps on nature reserves scattered around Germany since 1989. And what the chart shows is the daily biomass caught per trap per day, and how it changed in the 27-year period following 1989. And you can see there's a general decline. In actual fact, the average catch fell by 76% in 27 years, which is pretty terrifying if that's representative of the bigger picture. And there's been a lot of debate about, is this happening everywhere? We have a lot of data gaps. Most insects are not being carefully monitored. But all the evidence we have suggests that this is not something weird happening on German nature reserves, but actually it's a more general phenomenon. I'll show you a couple of other examples. So my speciality are bumblebees. I've spent the last 35 years studying bumblebees, charming little creatures. And this is one of my favorites. This is a species called Bombus silvarum, the shrill carder bee, because it has a slightly higher pitched buzz than the average bumblebee. I'm just showing you UK data here, fairly obviously. It used to be a common species. Pre-1960, it was pretty widespread and abundant in the southern half of Britain, and across Belgium, I should say. But as time has gone on, this species has been disappearing. By the year 2000, when I became interested in what was happening with this particular species, it was confined to about 6 sites in the UK. And I went looking for them that's a place called Salisbury Plain, which was close to where I was based at the time. And I spent a whole summer looking for this bee and got really excited when I found a couple of them, but they were very scarce. Since 2000, that population has gone extinct. And very recently, the population to the west has gone extinct. So this bee, within my lifetime, has gone from being an abundant insect to one that's teetering on the edge of extinction. And as I say, in Belgium, it's also now critically endangered. It's just about hanging on for the moment. So this has happened on my watch, on our watch. There are young people here, I see, so I can't blame you. Those of us that are old enough, this has happened within our lifetimes. One more depressing example before we move on to other things. As far as we can tell, this is happening globally. We don't have anywhere near as good a data on insect populations from the tropics as we do from temperate regions. But this is a dramatic example from Costa Rica, where they've been running light traps which attract insects at night since the 1980s. And you can see this in 1984, these lights were attracting an astonishing diversity of moths and beetles and all sorts of other amazing insects. I would have loved to have been there back in 1984. But they've been trapping every night ever since. And this is a more recent picture from exactly the same spot on the same day of the year, but in 2019, and you can see a pretty dramatic difference. So insects appear to have declined, but most people haven't really noticed anything. Because most people don't pay any attention to insects, they don't care about insects, they're not on their radar. But there is one thing that if you're old enough, you do remember, which is, I'm sure many of you will recognize from this cartoon drawing. It's sometimes called the windshield phenomenon. If you went for a long drive in the summer 30 or 40 years ago, you had to stop. When I was a child, we would have to stop the car on summer holiday drives. And my dad would get me to scrub the windscreen to get rid of all the splattered insects. So you literally couldn't see where you were going. It became dangerous. At some point, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly when, and it kind of snuck up on us so that nobody can remember exactly what date it happened. But at some point, it stopped happening. And these days, you can drive a very long way in most of Western Europe in the summer without needing to stop to clean your windscreen. Now, the cartoonist has gone on to predict the consequences of this. And it's an interesting point because, of course, we do need insects. Their disappearance has consequences for all of us. So I just want to go through why insects are important to humans. So they make up the bulk of biodiversity, as I've mentioned, but then they're food for a very large proportion of the things that aren't insects. So most species of birds eat insects, as do bats. Lots of reptiles, amphibians, freshwater fish, they all depend upon insects for food. So if the insects go, then they're going to go. But insects aren't just important as food. They perform lots of what are often described by scientists as ecosystem services, things like helping to control crop pests. And they're really important in nutrient cycles. They recycle dead and decaying material, things like dead bodies, which are recycled by a whole range of carrion beetles and flies and so on. And dung from animals, which is recycled by dung beetles and various dung flies. And there are insects that keep the soil healthy and distribute seeds and so on. All of this it's not very glamorous stuff, and we completely take it for granted. Very few people pay any attention to this. But if it stopped happening, we'd really notice. The only thing that insects do, which I think is widely appreciated by the general public, is what these insects are doing. These, of course, are flower-visiting insects, which are pollinators. Many people seem to incorrectly believe that pollination is all done by bees, and much as I love bees, I have to admit that isn't the case. Pollination is actually done by thousands of different species of butterflies and moths and wasps and beetles and flies and the bees. But between them, they pollinate somewhere in the region of 87% of all wild plant species. So if pollination stopped happening, then almost all wild plants would fail to set seed and would ultimately disappear, which would be catastrophic for ecosystems. And of course, there's a direct human link here, which we're all familiar with. Roughly 3/4 of the crops we grow in the world wouldn't give a full harvest without being pollinated by some kind of insect. So we're used to our supermarkets being replete with this amazing array of fruits and veg, available 12 months of the year, often flown in from all around the world. If you take away those that are pollinated by insects, things wouldn't look so rosy. We wouldn't have anywhere near as many apples, cherries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, tomatoes, pumpkins, even coffee and chocolate are dependent on insect pollinators. Imagine a world without those. It doesn't bear thinking about. So we need to make sure we don't end up like these folk. These pictures are from southwest China, where there are large areas of apple and pear orchards, which they now have to hand pollinate. The farmers go out, the whole family goes out with little paintbrushes and pots of pollen. And they send their children climbing into the branches to get the flowers that the adults can't reach. Because they've wiped out pollinators, there are too few pollinators left to adequately pollinate the trees. It's just about economic to do this in China, but can you imagine a European farmer going out to hand pollinate his orchard or his field of oilseed rape? It's not really going to happen. And so we do need to look after insects for very selfish reasons. Our well-being depends upon them. And I've trotted this argument out hundreds of times over the years, and it's absolutely valid. We do, for selfish reasons, depend upon insects. But I also find this argument slightly unsatisfying because it worries me, well, two things. One is that there are insects out there that probably don't do anything that we benefit from. So do we not worry about those? Do we just let them die? And secondly, it doesn't capture why I like insects, why everyone I know that's enthusiastic about insects, it's not really because they're vital pollinators and because they're worried about their apple supply. It's because they like them or they think they're fascinating and beautiful and deserving of survival for their own sake, not just because they do something for us. So just to give you an example, you may feel I'm rambling slightly. Let me show you an amazing insect, the St. Helena giant earwig. The biggest earwig that ever lived on the planet that we know of. about 7 centimeters long, so not quite as big as it appears here, but pretty impressive. Lived on the island of St. Helena, which is in the South Atlantic, very remote. Sadly, it's now extinct. It's been extinct since the 1960s. Used to live in seabird colonies, and we think it was eaten by the rats that we accidentally introduced to the island. There were no consequences, it just disappeared quietly, but it seems to me the world is a sadder place for not having a giant earwig in it, even if none of us were going to go there and see it. And what's more, didn't that earwig have a right to life just as much as we do, I would argue. Okay, so if we're going to reverse insect declines and ensure no more disappear, we need to understand why they're declining, and I'm not going to spend long on this. But there are lots of drivers. It's habitat loss, the way farming has intensified, the use of pesticides are all important, but there are lots of others too. Things like climate change is starting to kick in. Light pollution is emerging as a driver of nocturnal insect declines, and so on and so on. So the poor insects, they've been around, as I say, for a very long time. They've survived mass extinction events before. They survived the one that wiped the dinosaurs out 65 million years ago. But they're struggling now because they're being bombarded by a whole load of different problems, all of them man-made. This diagram's a little bit complicated, but it kind of illustrates the point. So you've got the bumblebee in the middle, and they're stressed in multiple ways all at the same time. They struggle to find much in the way of flowers in the modern landscape. They may struggle to find somewhere to nest. When they do find flowers, they're often contaminated with a cocktail of pesticides, so they're chronically exposed to mixtures of pesticides, which can have all sorts of complicated consequences for their health and their immune system and their ability to navigate and so on. So put all this together, and it's not surprising, really, that they're struggling. So what can we do? Well, I'm nearly out of time, so I can't go into any great detail, but hopefully some of the later speakers will fill in some of the gaps. There are lots of different things we can do. I guess the broad good news is that insects can recover really quickly if we provide them with the right habitat, if we remove some of these headwinds that we've created for them. So I've kind of roughly categorized things we might do under 3 headings there. Farming, rewilding, by which I mean setting aside more land for nature, and what we can do in gardens. I'll say a tiny bit more about the first and the last of those. So I don't want to bash farmers at all. We obviously need farming, we need food, or otherwise we'd all starve. But I think it's becoming clear that the modern industrial farming system that we've developed is not sustainable in the long term, for at least 3 reasons, which are depicted here. Firstly, it's the biggest driver of biodiversity loss, and yet, as I've already explained, farming depends upon biodiversity, so it's undermining its own foundations. It's also doing terrible damage to soil. The World Health Organization recently estimated that 40% of the world's soils are now badly degraded, which is clearly something we can't carry on doing, or else what are future generations going to grow their crops in? And food production is also a big contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. About 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions are associated with food production. So I would argue that we can't carry on down this route, and that we need to find a truly sustainable way to feed the growing human population, which is a real challenge. It probably helps to step back and think, what does the perfect farming system look like? And it certainly needs to be one which sustains soils long term, so that future generations inherit soil to grow their crops in. I think broadly we need to find a way to produce food which works with nature rather than trying to kill everything with a whole barrage of chemical pesticides. And of course, whatever system we come up with, it needs to produce enough food and enough healthy food for us all to have a good diet. And that sounds like quite a challenge, but actually there are farmers already doing this. I haven't got time, it's a whole separate talk. But I'll just flag up, sorry to plug my books, but I've got a book coming out next month, which is about how you can help to support more sustainable farming systems through the shopping choices you make when you go to the supermarket, and through what you choose to eat. Okay, let me just skip on to what we can do in our gardens. Most of us aren't farmers, don't have large areas of land, but many people have access to some kind of small urban patch of land, a garden, maybe just a roof terrace, a window box. And we can do a lot in that kind of space, and it provides an opportunity that many people can get involved in. I know the figures for the UK better than elsewhere. In the UK, there are 22 million private gardens covering an area of about 500,000 hectares. So there must be hundreds of millions of private gardens across Western Europe. Just imagine if they were all pesticide-free, full of wildflowers and pollinator-friendly plants, maybe with a nice pond and a shaggy lawn full of flowers and a pile of logs in the corner to provide overwintering habitat for insects. All things that are really easy to do. That would provide an international network of bumblebee, insect-friendly habitat, which would really make a difference, I think. Again, I haven't got time to go into any of the details, but I'm going to flag up my books once more. These are older books, which you might read if you want to know more about how to make your garden wildlife friendly, or check out my YouTube channel, which is full of very badly made videos, but advice about how to make your space more insect and generally wildlife friendly. Okay, I need to wrap up because I think I'm out of time. We don't often stop to think about it, but we live on a rock that's hurtling through space with a crust of life clinging to its surface. It's completely extraordinary. It's undoubtedly unique. Who knows? Oh, not mine. Who knows what life is out there, but this is our home. It gives us everything. It should be our most treasured possession. You know, Elon Musk seems to think that we can go and live on Mars. I wish he would go and live on Mars. But for the rest of us, we should do a better job of looking after what we have and ensure that our future and our children inherit a healthy planet. So what better way to start looking after our planet better than by looking after these little insects which live all around us? Thank you very much for listening.